Hey guys, Spud Knocker here, as always, and today we've got a very special video in which we're going to go over the results of a recent survey that I published to my community here on YouTube and on my Discord server. Now I dubbed it the DCS World Players Survey because it delves into questions on the demographics of DCS World players, as well as the aircraft they own, the terrains they own, what types of missions they like to fly, whether they fly in single player or multiplayer, all these kinds of questions that roll into what DCS World players do in DCS World, as well as some questions regarding what DCS World players are looking forward to most in the future. Now, I wanted to publish this survey because as a DCS World content creator, I have third-party developers, both active and prospective third-party developers who say want to make the switch from IL2 or Microsoft Flight Simulator over to DCS World. They want to know what DCS World players want. They want to know what kind of aircraft they would want to see, what kind of terrains they'd want to see, and of course, different campaigns and campaign scenarios. A lot of DCS World campaign makers want to, of course, make as much money off of their efforts as possible. So they like to know what DCS World aircraft they should make their campaign based off of, on what map, using what add-ons such as Supercarrier or World War II asset packs, things of that nature, so that way they can get the best return on their monetary and time investments creating those campaigns. And of course, the same is absolutely said for third-party developers who want to build an aircraft for DCS World or build a terrain for DCS World. I think this Syria map is a great example because that is a third-party map that DCS World pilots absolutely love. So because these third-party devs, they come to me so often for this kind of stuff, and this is not meant to be a brag or anything like that, it's just simply a fact that as a content creator, I have a pretty good bead on the community. Not meant to be, kind of like, oh, look at me or anything like that, but just a simple fact. I interact with lots of people in the community, I fly with lots of people in the community, all this kind of stuff. And so people want to know, especially third-party developers, and I figured you guys would want to see the results of this survey as well. So after kind of like more or less going off of like, it feels like people want this, it kind of seems like people want that, I kind of wanted to have some data backing up what I've been telling active and prospective third-party developers. And so I wanted to create a survey. Now this survey is not perfect, it's not all-encompassing, but I think it's 90% of the way there, and it's good enough. So let's go ahead and take a look at the results of the survey. We'll do a little bit of editorializing on the results for the different questions that were involved in the survey, and you guys can definitely add to your opinion in the comment section down below, as I'm going to use this video to send to various third-party developers who want to build campaigns, aircraft, terrains, etc., to show them what they DCS World players want and what they already love. So let's go ahead and throw our FA-18 here into a little bit of an autopilot hold so that way we don't crash while we're taking a look at these survey results. As I'm sure some of you guys have noticed, we are flying over Cyprus in the rain near RAF Akrotiri. Very cool airbase, I really like it so far. So we'll kind of come out here. We'll trade some of this airspeed for altitude. Kind of slowly jet down to a little bit of better holding speed for the autopilot. And we get a nice break in the clouds here, so why don't we go ahead and use this break in the clouds to go ahead and put the aircraft into a bit of a hold. Feels good to be back in a fixed-wing aircraft. I can't tell you how weird it is flying helicopters. Alrighty, so with that, let's go ahead and Alt-tab over to Chrome and take a look at those results. So we got a lot of responses, far more responses than I thought we'd ever get. Almost 1,400 responses for this survey, and that is absolutely awesome. I love it. And so we have, let's see, my first question here was your age range. It has seemed to me in the past that DCS World tends to skew to a older set of players. You know, it's a very complex game. It requires a lot of money to get into it for the HOTAS, the PC that can run DCS, all this kind of stuff. The barrier to entry to DCS World is very, very high. The largest percentage, 24.7, is in the age range of 30 to 40. Not a big surprise there. It really matches up to a lot of the demographics that I see for my YouTube videos. If you guys would like to see the analytics for different demographics on my YouTube channel, please let me know in the comments section below, and I would be 100% happy to share that with you guys. The second largest group is the 18 to 24. And so that's a very interesting age group because that's not really an age group that you would think would have the capital to get into DCS World. But in that age range, you have a lot of folks who really love airplanes, really want to fly, and really want to potentially join the military and fly military aircraft. Let's check on our F-18. We're good. And I can't tell you how many younger folks out there just play DCS World because that's what they want to do so badly. You know, DCS World is a remarkably aspirational product, and I think it is absolutely 100% perfect that in Eagle Dynamics trailers they make and things like that, they really lean into how aspirational of a product DCS World is. Everybody would love to be a fighter pilot. Not everybody can be a fighter pilot, but with DCS World, you can get as close to being a fighter pilot as is absolutely possible. Our next largest demographic, of course, the 24 to 30 range, totally, you know, very much within the expected range. 14.6% is 14 to 18. This one kind of surprised me with how large that percentage was. Second biggest is the 40 to 50. Now, in my dealings with people in DCS World communities, I would imagine that this demographic of 40 to 50 would be larger than it is, but it could be a little bit of a bias within the survey. Maybe older folks are not as inclined to actually take the survey as younger folks are. And then, of course, we got a small chunk here, 12 to 14, 60 plus, as well as a 50 to 60 category as well. And that's really interesting. You know, it's really spread all the way across from super young guys up to super old guys. No offense, old guys. And, you know, it's cool to have people in missions where you have guys who are 12 up to 60 in a mission that are flying together and working together. It's very, very cool to see. Next, of course, I wanted to see, do you work in the aviation industry, for the military, the airlines, are you a flight instructor, whatever it might be. And of course, we got a large chunk that is a no, but a surprisingly large chunk that was a yes on the survey as well. Very, very cool to kind of like put that into a bit of a data set. I guess not a huge surprise. Like I said, you know, not everybody can be a pilot, but with DCS World, you can be a pilot as close to a military pilot as possible, which is very, very cool. And just really shows that aspirational nature of DCS World itself. Do you work in the aerospace industry? Do you work for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, etc., etc., etc.? You know, I thought this was going to be a lot bigger than it was. The no category was a good 94.8%. whereas the yes category was only 5.2%. I really thought that this was going to be a larger chunk, whereas people who were really much in the know in terms of like worked in that industry thought it would be super cool to hop in and fly DCS World. But you never know, I suppose. Are you a licensed pilot in real life? Yes, no, student pilot. So no, again, matches up with what we've been seeing so far. 11.2% are student pilots. I see this a lot. Lots of people fly DCS World because they're learning how to fly. And a lot of the things that, you know, flight simulators, in reality, whether you're flying an F-18, a Boeing 737, or a Cessna 172 in the flight sim, it really doesn't matter so much. The monkey skills that you're kind of learning and developing some muscle memory as to how airplanes fly in a simulator, it really doesn't matter what you're flying in that sim, unless you're doing, of course, very, very procedural things. But desktop home flight simulators, it doesn't matter what you're flying in that simulator. It's all still equally valid to helping you develop those kind of muscle memory skills for flying a real airplane. Then, of course, yes, you know, that yes was 10.9%, not very much, kind of very close to matching up to that do you work in the aviation industry question up here, which is, of course, to be expected. Now, coming on down, we can see how did you find DCS World? Starting to get more into those actual DCS World questions. And that, of course, is YouTube content. 53.4%. That makes 100% of sense. DCS World's main driver of new customers seems to absolutely be 100% YouTube driven, which is why YouTube creators such as myself, Jabbers, Ralphie Dude, anybody else that I'm blanking on at the moment, you know, super important to keep that going, because that's what keeps DCS World alive. From the super serious guys, I would say I'm on the more serious side of things, to the super silly guys as well. We've got, of course, internet search. People just like, hey, can I fly an F-18 in a flight simulator? You know, I'm sure it pops up things like, you know, F-18s for Microsoft Flight Simulator to F-18s in DCS World. And of course, if someone wants to fly a fighter jet in a flight sim, DCS World is really the only game in town. If you're flying an F-18 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you're really missing 98% of what an F-18 can really do. Second biggest, of course, is word of mouth, family, friends, etc. Yeah, did your friends tell you about DCS World? That's pretty darn cool. I wish I had more friends that I knew in person that flew DCS World. That'd be a lot of fun, that's for sure. And then, of course, advertisement. You know, I'm not totally sure what these people mean by advertisement, and I'm not really totally sure what I meant by putting that in this survey. I probably shouldn't have put that in there, but I'm thinking this is like trailers for DCS World that they've seen, rather than being YouTube content created by, say, a content creator. I think people are kind of putting that box into being more like official content made by Eagle Dynamics, because the only real advertisements I've seen is once in a while in, say, PC Pilot magazine, there had been like a DCS World thing inside there. But other than that, let's go ahead and move on. Your DCS World battle station setup. So this was, it's basically chunked up into thirds for the most part here. High-end rig of $2,000 plus is right in the middle with 34.1%. You know, this is not surprising at all. Most DCS World pilots that I know have pretty darn high-end computer rigs that they run DCS World on. It really requires it for, especially for multiplayer. Of course, mid-tier rig, $1,000 to $2,000. You know, that's going to be things like, I would say, probably graphics cards ranging from, you know, 1070s up to 2060s, maybe even a 3060 if you could get your hands on it, things like that. As well as kind of maybe more like your Ryzen type CPUs rather than maybe Intel CPUs, things of that nature. And then budget rig, I think this is going to be people mostly with like gaming laptops, or they're just trying to squeeze the last little bit of life out of their older system, and they're trying to run DCS World on a potato. No offense, guys. Okay, moving on down to DCS World controls setup. So we got a large spectrum here. But interestingly, I think there's a bit of bias in this, in that most DCS World hardcore fans are gonna be more likely to actually take this survey. So 29.4% have a high-end HOTAS. So that's $500 plus. So that covers the Thrustmaster Warthog and above. So like, say, Virpil hardware, VKB hardware, all this kind of stuff that's going to run more and more expensive. Now the mid-tier, so that's $250 to $500. So I guess that could potentially cover folks who are flying with a Thrustmaster Warthog, or maybe they just have a Thrustmaster Warthog stick, or maybe just the throttle with a cheaper stick, or something of that nature. You know, the Logitech X56 is about $250, things of that nature there. And then, of course, we've got a mid-tier, so that's going to be a $150 to $250. That's going to be, you know, probably your X52s, your X52 Pros, things of that nature. Your Thrustmaster T1600M kind of situation, as well as the low-end HOTAS. That's going to be like probably that T1600M that we just mentioned, something of that nature. You know, these things, they all kind of blend together, and there's such a spectrum as to what folks can actually have out there. So that's kind of what that is there. Budget stick. So this is going to be like, say, just a Logitech flight stick. with not very many buttons on it, not really made to be a very high-end HOTAS rig. You know, so there's plenty of people that use them, and they use them really well. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You know, good on you for making it work, you know? Game controller, you know, Xbox, Logitech gamepad, etc. Very small sliver in there. It's really not workable to fly DCS World, or in my opinion, really any flight simulator with just a gamepad, but it can be done. And if you guys want to see me try in DCS World to fly, like, say, the F-18 or something like that with a gamepad, let me know in the comments below, and maybe we can make a fun video about that. And then mouse and keyboard, of course, the smallest demographic at 1.4% down there. That just sounds impossible. I don't know how you guys do it, but I guess you end up doing it pretty darn well. Anyway, do you fly with rudder pedals? I guess I should have put a no answer in here, but, you know, potentially that, you know, the reduction in total number of responses and folks who actually responded, which is a reduction of roughly about 50 to 60 actual responses there. Maybe that's the no that's in there. Now, this is important because for me, you know, as somebody who likes to teach newer pilots how to fly in DCS World better, having rudders and rudder pedals is absolutely essential. So 56.8% here have rudder pedals on a rudder axis. So that is fantastic. That's a larger percentage that I would have guessed. And I'm guessing that as people get more and more deeper into DCS World, then they realize, oh boy, I definitely need some rudders. So they go out and they buy themselves some rudder pedals. And then, of course, we've got a twist stick for rudder axis. So, like, say your Logitech X56 uses a twisting stick grip in order that you can use that as a Z-axis for your rudders. I find that to be rather tedious, but it works for lots of people. And there you go, 31.1% of responses use a twist grip. And then rudder axis on the throttle, the T1600M throttle, for instance, as kind of an example there. And so there's lots of people that use those too. 12.1% of the 1,382 folks who responded to the survey, they use a axis on their throttle for their rudder pedals. I know that Mr. Matt Wagner, the Jesus of DCS World, he uses the same thing. He has a axis on his throttle that he uses for his rudder pedals. Nothing wrong with it, just interesting to see how that breaks down. Do you fly with head tracking? 15.3% said no. That is interesting to me in the fact that I could never fly DCS World without head tracking. I love my track IR and I will never ever get rid of it. Head tracking, track IR, 58.5%, track IR, etc. So that could be things like the Tobii eye tracker, a PlayStation camera, head tracking system, things of that nature. I personally think that track IR is absolutely the best solution possible for head tracking. And then, of course, we've got 26.2% are using virtual reality of the responses that we got for this question. Very interesting there. I would have thought that maybe virtual reality would have, been a little bit higher, and that no head tracking would have been smaller. But the head tracking track IR is a category that I am not surprised by at all, being roughly about 60% there. I knew it was probably more than half. Okay, this is coming down to a very interesting one. So we are only talking about third-party stuff here, or not necessarily third-party stuff, but additional DLC content. So it could be made by Eagle Dynamics, it could be made by a third party. We're not talking about things that come with DCS World Standard, like the Caucasus map. So we're taking a look at the Nevada Test and Training Range. 702 out of the 1,200 responses here have that. So that's 58.4% have the Nevada Test and Training Range. That really surprises me. That is far more people than I would have ever guessed have the NTTR. Syria comes in second overall with 75.1% of responders having owned the Syria map. That's a little bit surprising as well, but it makes sense because Syria hasn't been out there quite as long as the Persian Gulf map. Of course, the Overall winner here, the Persian Gulf, no big surprise, 1,059 folks, that's 88% that responded, own the Persian Gulf map. Not a big surprise at all. That is probably the best map for PvP multiplayer because of the two separated sides by water, as well as it's a map that's been out there for a while. It's been discounted a number of times, and it's a great, fantastic map. Compared to Syria, it's starting to show its age a little bit, in my opinion, but it's still a great map to fly on. Just for me, I'm a little bit burnt out on it because I have flown on it so much in the past. The channel map, only 260 folks have it, 21.6%. I'm not surprised at all. A lot of folks in the DCS World community tend to think that the channel map and the Normandy map kind of overlap each other. I would say that the channel map looks a heck of a lot better than the Normandy map does in terms of its visual fidelity. And I think that Normandy was really just a kind of a Kickstarter, a practice session for Ugra Media before they kicked off Syria. Syria just looks so much better than the Normandy map. Again, Normandy, 30.5% own it. I think that not very many people own it compared to, say, Persian Gulf, because not that many people fly World War II airplanes in DCS World comparatively, at least in the communities that I surveyed, so there could be some bias there, because I know there are some large warbird communities out there. And it's definitely higher than Channel because the Normandy has been out there for a while, whereas the Channel hasn't. Normandy's been discounted a couple times. The Channel map has not. Again, I don't think that nearly as many people are going to have the Channel and Normandy even going forward. I think that really the most popular World War II map is going to be the Marianas when the World War II version of the Marianas comes out. Favorite map for single player, multiplayer missions and campaigns. This one's important because this is like where I get asked by third parties all the time. What map do people want campaigns on? What map do people want missions on? These kinds of things. And that is, of course, the largest is going to be Syria. And, there's only 1,200-ish responses for this question, but it's the new map, it's the hot map, that's what people want stuff on. And that's what I've been trying to push campaign makers towards, is like, I know you want to go back and make a campaign for the Persian Gulf, Iran versus the West, or Iran versus Gulf countries, whatnot, but try to push them a lot towards Syria because that's what people want right now. Persian Gulf map, of course, there's lots of people who want stuff for the Persian Gulf map, but the vast majority do want it for the Syria map. Next, of course, is going to be NTTR. That's not really a big surprise there. A lot of people have NTTR. A lot of people like flying modern jets in Nevada and kind of more of a training scenario, I guess you could say. And then, of course, Normandy and the Channel map are very, very small percentages down here as well. Again, that's probably an inherent bias in my community against flying World War II airplanes in DCS. But I still don't see the community really latching on to World War II the way other people have, or the way maybe other people might expect. Aircraft that you own. I guess this was a bit of a misnomer in the fact that I did not include helicopters in this, and I probably should have. But this was before the Hind came out, and I really wasn't into helicopters at all before the Hind. And still really just mainly focused on the on fixed wing to begin with. DCS World aircraft that you own. The undisputed king here, and no surprise at all from my perspective, is the FA-18C Hornet. And we're going to see why the F-18 is the king of DCS World in the next response just down below. The F-14A and B Tomcat, I accidentally made a F-14B down here. That was a mistake. I put in a new response for F-14A and B. So add 5 to that, so 740 of the responders have the F-14. That comes in a very easy 4th place behind Flaming Cliffs 3, with 53.8% of folks that responded owning the F-14. The F-16 has 64.3% of folks that own DCS World modules have the F-16. The AV-8B, 39% of folks, 533 that responded, have the AV-8. And interestingly, this was kind of a one that surprised me. Is only 13.7% of folks who have the JF, or only 13.7% of folks have the JF-17 Thunder. That's really surprising to me. I thought it would be a lot more than that. It's a pretty capable little jet, but it just does not have the name recognition that, say, something like the F-14, F-16, AV-8 has going for it. The A-10C, 50.9% of folks have the A-10C. Not a big surprise. That's the module that's been around the absolute longest, and is very unsurprising that many people have it. The Viggen, only 21.2% of those that responded own the Viggen. Not really a big surprise there again, just because of the fact that it's a jet flown by one country that never flew in combat. It just doesn't have that name recognition that, say, an F-18 or an F-14 does. Flaming Cliffs 3, only 57.2%. I would have thought more would have had Flaming Cliffs 3, but a lot of folks, we'll see in a moment why a lot of folks maybe don't have Flaming Cliffs. The L-39, not surprising there, only 12.4% have it. Aviojet, even lower at 9.2%. MiG-19, even lower at 8.1%. No big surprise there. I probably haven't flown the MiG-19 in years. More people have the F5. I love flying the F5. The F5 is a lot of fun to fly. So 31% have the F5. MiG-21, 23.2%. Another, again, it seems like people want Russian jets, but then they don't buy them. So that's a little bit of an interesting demographic there, and an interesting kind of sales perspective there. It'd be interesting to see like the behind-the-scenes data from Eagle Dynamics, if they would ever share it, as to how many people have bought the Russian jets that are already out there. F-86, 18.7%. Not surprising. I mean, it's a cool jet, but it's old. It's not super capable compared to newer jets that can do lots of different things. MiG-15, even lower. Not surprising there again. P-51, 24.3% of those that responded have it. With the warbirds that are round out the bottom of the list, they are very low, 24, 13, 3% only have the I-16. Wow, that's probably the lowest one, is the I-16. Yak-52, that's another trainer, but a prop job, 5.9%. Spitfire, BF-109, all these guys are very, very low, with the P-51 Mustang definitely being the top spot for World War II airplanes. And I just think that if people are going to fly in DCS World, they're going to fly modern jets for the most part. It's very cool to have the clicky World War II planes, but I think for a lot of folks, they're novelties. They like to fly them around. But when it comes to playing online with friends and stuff like that, people want to fly the modern jets, because that's what DCS World is really known for, in my opinion. Moving down, so this one is one that I found to be very interesting. Do you fly one aircraft exclusively or almost exclusively? And this is where we can really see that the FA-18C Hornet is the absolute undisputed king of DCS World. 49.9% of those that responded fly the FA-18C exclusively or almost exclusively. This really shows how incredibly powerful of a force the F-18 is in DCS World. It's been the modern jet with a pointy nose that goes fast and can drop laser-guided bombs and shoot air-to-air missiles that's been around the longest. It is really what brought DCS World to the forefront of PC gamers' kind of perspective, and that is the FA-18C. Nothing rivals the F-18C in terms of market share within the demographic of DCS World. I know plenty of folks who are in my community who got into DCS World for the FA-18, and that's all they fly. They haven't bought anything else, or maybe they've bought one or two other modules, but they just went back to the F-18 because that's what they know and love, and that's what they can fly effectively with their friends. And so, not a big surprise there at all. The F-16 is kind of creeping up on it, with 21.8% flying that aircraft exclusively or almost exclusively, but not nearly as much as the Hornet. Now, I think that as the F-16 gets more and more features, more and more folks are going to start hopping over and really mainlining the F-16 as more stuff gets added to it. You know, the release of the F-16 at very first was great, but the addition of additional content to the aircraft and functionality and whatnot has been exceedingly slow, and has been something that's been kind of a not so great thing within the DCS World community, in my opinion. In third place is the F-14A and B Tomcat with 10.4%. And the F-14 requires dedication in order to fly it, and fly it effectively. Folks who are really dedicated to flying the F-14 can fly it marvelously, and those who just dabble in the F-14 have a pretty hard time with it. And so there are definitely some guys out there who fly the F-14 Tomcat almost exclusively. The next biggest is the A-10. You know, that makes complete sense. There's a lot of people out there who absolutely love the A-10, and the A-10 has an absolute cult following behind it for very good reasons. I'm not even going to go into these other ones. They're just such small percentages. The Flaming Cliffs probably comes next with 3%, then the AV-8, and then the Mirage, JF-17, and whatnot. For campaign builders who are looking to build campaigns, I think right now the FA-18C's demographic is saturated with too many campaigns. I think that if you want to kind of get a good ROI on your building a campaign as a third-party developer, go for the F-16. I think that that is a place where more content needs to be built for the F-16, and more people will adopt the F-16 as a result, as more features are added and more campaigns are built for it. Your first choice in single-player and multiplayer missions. This is more or less the same question, and we have almost exact demographics, but, you know, let's say if people, you know, it's a good question to see if this kind of matches up, and we can see that, you know, rather than being exclusivity for, you know, do you only fly this aircraft? This is like, what aircraft do you own that you would rather fly the most in a mission, both single player or multiplayer? And again, these demographics almost match up perfectly. We've got 49.3% with the F-18C, 22.6% for the F-16, the F-14 coming in at roughly about 10%, again, very similar to here, and then, of course, the A-10 is next, followed by probably Flaming Cliffs and the AV-8, then the spectrum of other aircraft in there as well, with just teeny tiny slivers of the demographic. And most anticipated upcoming aircraft for DCS World, I did include rotary wing aircraft in this, and the most popular, of course, is going to be the F-15E Strike Eagle. In reality, I think that the F-15E, if it's done really well by Razbam, can probably be the absolute crown jewel of DCS World, and probably maybe even usurp that position from the FA-18C. It's an aircraft whose avionics are going to be very similar to that of the FA-18C, made by the same manufacturer, as well as a lot of the same components in terms of how the screens work, the avionics work, all this kind of stuff, as well as the fact that you can fly it by yourself no problem, unlike the F-14 Tomcat. But if you wanted to, you can pop a friend in the back seat in multiplayer and make yourself that much more effective. Up next, in terms of people wanting it the most, is going to be the AH-64D Apache. Not really a big surprise there. Not really much to say there in terms of the fact that it's a cool helicopter. It can carry a lot of weapons, a lot of more advanced weapons, and it's got MFDs and pretty screens in it for a helicopter. Pretty cool. And then coming next is the EF-2000 Eurofighter Typhoon. That is not a big surprise either. People really want the Eurofighter, especially those folks who live in Europe and are waiting to have some sort of representation for aircraft from Europe to, you know, that they can fly, that their country flies, whether you're from Germany, the UK, Italy, Spain, or any other country such as that. Next is the Mi-24, that already released, of course. And then we've got a smattering of other ones, the Mirage F1, F-8E Crusader, A-7E Corsair 2, the Corsair 1, the F-4U-1D, the MiG-23, and the Fiat G91. I should have included the A6E intruder, but my original thinking for the survey was only aircraft that are upcoming that we've seen renders of the cockpit. And we have not seen renders of the cockpit for the A6E intruder unless I'm missing something, and I'm sure somebody will correct me down in the comment section below. Favorite era. So this is going to be a maybe potentially some bias because it's my community and I tend to focus on modern jets. But I think that most people in DCS World who own DCS World modules would agree the modern era is probably their favorite. So we got 57.3% looking at the modern era, which I classified as 2000 to now. Late Cold War, so like 1975 to 1991-ish, you know, example would be like the 1982 Lebanon War. That came in second with 30.1% of responses. The Vietnam era, 1960 to 1975, that would be a great era, and I'm going to make a video coming up on why we need the F4E Phantom II so badly in DCS World. It is a massive gap in the DCS World lineup that needs to be filled very, very badly. We've got World War II coming in. Only 4.5% of folks who responded with 1,365 responses, only 4.5% wants to fly in World War II. I found that to be very, very interesting, and I wonder what the ROI for those third-party devs who do World War II stuff, I wonder what that is for them. It'd be very interesting to talk to, say, Reflected about his ROI when it comes to his World War II campaigns. Again, this could be reflecting bias within my own communities, and we can probably take it with a bit of a grain of salt. And then early Cold War, so that would be like Korean War era. Very, very small, 0.8%. That's going to be those folks who are really hardcore, who love flying the MiG-15 and the F-86, I suppose. Favorite mission set and role. First, we've got multi-role, so self-escort, strike, things like that, where you are flying in by yourself. You have to defend yourself from enemy aircraft, potentially from SAMs on the ground with, carrying a harm, and then drop bombs on a target and fly back home. 49% of those surveyed said that they like this the best. Air to ground was 33.6%, and then air to air focused was only 17.4%. I found that to be very, very interesting. I think that this probably reflects back to the FA-18 being the king of DCS World, and we can see that that percentages match up almost perfectly in terms of 49% of people love multi-role, and 49% of people fly the FA-18 exclusively or almost exclusively. So that's very, very interesting. I also find it interesting that folks enjoy flying air to ground more than they enjoy flying air to air for pure air to ground and pure air to air. That's an interesting one. I think that is inherently due to the AI in DCS World being finicky at best, I guess you could say, and the way it kind of cheats and can see through clouds and do all kinds of crazy things. So not a huge surprise there, I guess, but a little bit of a surprise. This is where my community bias is really coming in, starting to show, is do you fly in multiplayer? Blue is yes, red is no. So 76.3% say yes, 23.7% say no. This is absolutely community bias. I know that Eagle Dynamics has said that something like only 10% of DCS World players fly multiplayer regularly. I don't know if that's still the same or not. I know that was quite a number of years ago now that they kind of published that statistic, so it'd be really interesting to see a new statistic directly from them. A lot of this stuff would be really interesting to see from the Eagle Dynamics side. But do you prefer single player or multiplayer? I guess this is more or less the same question, but do you fly in multiplayer and do you prefer single player or multiplayer? It's a little bit different, right? It's your preference versus do you. If you fly multiplayer once in a while, you could say yes. If you prefer single player, you could say single player here. And it kind of shows that people do prefer single player at a kind of a pretty large clip, and that bodes well for third-party developers of campaigns. 65.1% prefer multiplayer. I find myself going back and forth. Sometimes I really like single player, sometimes I really like multiplayer. I would say, for the most part, I prefer multiplayer. And then, do you fly single player exclusively? no, and yes. So these questions are similar, but we're getting very slight variations to this question. Do you fly single player exclusively? So this is going to be taking out the chunk from here that maybe fly single player or multiplayer a little bit, and then it kind of adds it to the idea of do you fly it exclusively. So 20% fly single player exclusively, which is 10% down, or sorry, about 3% down from those who say no here. They're more or less the same, and it kind of makes sense that they'd be the same. Do you enjoy PvP or PvE multiplayer? No big surprise here, in my opinion. Folks enjoy flying together against the AI, and I think that's where DCS World multiplayer really shines, is in very coordinated, very team-focused, very real, making it as realistic as possible, and then flying as a large strike package all together against the AI. That's where DCS World multiplayer shines, in my perspective. Now, folks, 23.5% of folks who responded enjoy and want PvP. Do you like fun and casual game modes like Capture the Flag? I enjoy those game modes. I think they're very, very fun, and I think it's so interesting how right down the middle this is. I think that in a game that's supposed to be as serious, or as serious as a lot of people make DCS World out to be, you gotta have some fun and enjoy some silliness in DCS World once in a while, and that's what Capture the Flag really shines with. 50.7% like Capture the Flag, 49.3% do not. So like those kind of King of the Hill game types that people make, Capture the Flag, things like that, I think they're very fun. Do you fly and or enjoy DCS World modules? No, 62.2%, and then yes, 37.8%. I kind of think that this also kind of backs up my theory that a lot of people buy, they end up buying World War II modules. It's kind of like a bit of a novelty. They're like, oh, this is cool, I can click things in the cockpit in a World War II airplane. But then they go back and they fly modern jets for the most part. So yes, so a lot of people do have some World War II airplanes, but still a lot more people and a lot higher percentage prefer the modern day stuff, even though that some chunk of that percentage do have some World War II modules with them. Do you own the World War II assets pack? 30.9% said yes. That is a much larger percentage than I would have thought, and I'm surprised that many people have it at this point, when not that many people said they preferred modern day over World War II stuff. And I think it's very, very important that DCS World has kind of released some of those older, tanks and very ubiquitous kind of ground units from the World War II asset pack to regular DCS World. So that way, say, like Israel can have Shermans in a 1960s-esque campaign or something of that nature. That would be perfect for that kind of time period. Do you own the Supercarrier module? This is kind of rounding everything off. 68.2% said yes, and 31.8% said no. And so this really matches up with that kind of part of the pie that had the F-14 and part of the pie that had the F-18. Add those together, and you've got this yes section for the folks that fly carrier-based aircraft. And so that is really not a huge surprise there very much as well. So there we've got it, guys. We have our demographics of DCS World survey, or DCS World Players survey. I found it to be very interesting, and like I said, there were some surprises, as well as it really did confirm a lot of the things that I had known about DCS World players and DCS World modules. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and I hope it kind of gave you some ideas as to what your fellow DCS World players like and enjoy. And if you have any dissenting opinions, or you have any supporting opinions for anything you saw in this video, please leave a comment down below. And fly safe as always, and of course, stay healthy out there as well, folks. We'll see you in the next one.